All right, so here we are with lesson 3, all right, which is 1 and 2-step equations. Okay, so if we label the different parts of the equation here, don't forget, okay, we talked about this the last couple of days. This is the constant, all right, which is the number with no variable. This would be the variable, right, the x, okay, and then the 15 is what we call the coefficient, the number in front of the variable. All important vocab words when we're solving equations. Okay, so the goal here to solve a one-step or two-step equation would be to isolate the variable by using the inverse operation. Now, most of you would probably call it the opposite operation, meaning if you see plus, you minus. If you see minus, you plus. If you see divide, you multiply. And if you see multiply, you divide. All right, so using the algebra tiles at the right, what equation is modeled by the tiles? So it looks like we have 2x equals -6. All right, that ends up being a one-step equation. All right, we need to do one thing to simplify that, and that would be the opposite of what's happening between the 2 and the x. Right now they're being multiplied, so the opposite would be division. So we're going to divide both sides by 2, and we find out that x equals -3. Okay, let's get into some problems. All right, so when I look at number 1, what I see is division, okay? That's what's happening to the x. It's being divided by 1.5. So the inverse of division is multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 1.5. All right, so the idea here would be that if I do the inverse operation, it cancels out the regular operation that's happening in the equation, which leaves me with just the x, or the variable. And then I take 16 times 1.5, and I get 24. You can use your calculator if you need to for that. All right, now they want us to check our answers, which means we should take 24. And if I divide that by 1.5 on my calculator, I should get 16 for my answer, and that checks. Let's slide over here to number 2. What's the inverse or the opposite of subtraction? Well, that would be addition. So we're going to add 4.25 to both sides. Okay. So t, nothing happens, right? Stays by itself. And I'm taking -4 and I'm adding 4.25 to it, which gives me 0.25 as my answer. Okay, and then if I want to check my work, I would have to take 0.25, plug it in for the t, and if I subtract 4.25 from that, right, do I get -4? And the answer is yes, that checks. Okay, next up I have 6/7 e. I know you guys don't like fractions. That equals 12. The best way to get rid of a fraction is to multiply by its reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by 7/6. Multiply by 7/6. The reason I do that is because anytime I have the same thing on top and bottom, they cancel. So the 7's cancel and the 6's cancel, which means I'm left with just an e. Okay, now the nice thing about simplifying this in my head, because I don't have a calculator, would be the 6 and the 12 reduced to 2. And I can do 2 times 7 to get 14 as my best answer. I'd still want to check my answer, so I take 6/7 times 14 on my calculator, and I try to see, does it equal 12? And in this case, it does. Last example we're going to do together of a one-stepper is n plus 10 equals 3.5. So what's the opposite of plus? And that would be minus 10 and minus 10. All right, so when I subtract 10 from both sides, I end up finding out that 3.5 minus 10 ends up giving me -6.5. And again, I would like to check my answer, so I plug that in, -6.5 plus 10, type it in my calculator, and hopefully that gives me 3.5, and it does. To solve the equation below, Darren thinks you should subtract, oops, sorry about that. You should subtract from each side, while Eddie thinks you should divide both sides by 2.5. Who do you agree with, and who is correct? This is a very common mistake in equation solving. We see the 2.5, you want to subtract inherently, but what's happening between them is multiplication. It's not written there, right? But if it's a coefficient with a variable, it's multiplication, so we would want to divide by 2.5 on both sides. So it's just something to keep in mind that'll come up at different times. Okay, turn the page. So a couple of examples here that we're going to do together, and then I'm going to have you work on the other 4 on your own before we get to the word problems. So first up, we have a 2-step equation. All right, again, you always want to start farthest from the variable, so we'd like to start with the constant. Okay, so in this case, the -6 is the constant. The opposite of minus is plus. I like to draw a line where my equal sign is. That way I know I'm doing something on the same thing on both sides. So if I do that, I'll add 6 to both sides. And negative 12 plus 6 is negative 6. Okay, the n over 2 did not change. Now, n divided by 2, what's the opposite of division? And that would be multiplication. So I'm going to times both sides by 2. All right, and on the left-hand side, I get negative 12. And on the right-hand side, the 2's cancel, and I'm left with just an n. So my answer ends up being n equals negative 12. All right, I'm going to slide down here and do the next one. It's got some decimals in it, which is never anybody's friend. All right, same thing. I'm going to draw a line down here where my equal sign is. That way I just check myself to make sure that whatever I'm doing on one side, I do to the other side. Okay, it's not relevant yet, but it will be in a couple days. So if I subtract 31 from both sides, I'm left with d over 1.6 equals 9. Okay, and then I would want to multiply both sides by 1.6 because right now it's being divided by 1.6. All right, and that's probably one you're going to need your calculator for. If you do that correctly, you should get 14.4. All right, I would like you to do these other 4 problems here. So if you would want to pause the video, please. And then once you get your answers, come back and check them against what I have. All right, so there you see what the answers are with the work. So please compare what you did to what I did. And if you have to make any corrections, please do so. All right, and if you have questions, we can always answer them tomorrow as well. If you need to pause the video to do all that, you may do that as well. I'm going to scroll down. Wheels by the Waves rents bikes to customers for $3.50 an hour plus a $12 fee. Lucy spent $33 on a bike rental. How many hours did she rent the bike for? So here we have to have a little bit of knowledge about what the coefficient is versus what the constant is. Okay, well, the coefficient is going to impact the situation. All right, the constant is going to be the same price no matter what. So the $12 fee ends up being the constant. Okay, so that's going to be $12. Oops. Okay, plus $3.50 for every what? Hour, H. Okay, now if Lucy spent $33, it's going to equal 33. All right, so that would be our equation. 12 plus 350H equals 33. So I'd like you to take that and solve it. Remember, subtract the constant first, okay, and then divide by the coefficient. All right, next up, Paul is scuba diving and is 3.5 feet below sea level. He's descending, that's important, descending at a rate of 0.5 feet per minute. If Paul is now at 12 feet below sea level, how many minutes has he been diving? All right, so if he starts at 3.5 feet below sea level, okay, so 3.5, and he's descending, so he's going down, negative, okay, of 0.5 feet per minute, okay, and now he's 12 feet below. How long has he been diving for? So 3.5 feet minus 0.5, okay, per minute has to equal 12. All right, so go ahead and pause your video there. See if you can solve each of those equations. And you can come back for the answers. So if you're back, you should have got 6 for your hourly mark here in the first question. All right, so that's how long that Lucy, okay, rented her bike. And then if you're on the second one there and you talk about Paul, okay, then you probably would have gotten, sorry, my dog's getting after me right now. Stop. $17 minutes. Okay, it doesn't sound very likely, right, to dive 12 feet, but okay. And the last two problems here are word problems, so I'd like you to go ahead and check those out on your own. And once you're finished, come back and see your answers. So if you pause the video and you work through those on your own, these would be the answers you should have came up with the work. And now that you've finished that lesson, I'd also like you to do the homework that goes with it.